And good afternoon, and welcome to yet another picked webinar on a very pleasant day here in Pittsburgh. Temperature's not too warm, but it's pleasant. The sun keeps bursting through the cloud, which is nice. And it's going to be quite a delightful day, I hope, especially here on the webinar. As you see, we are dealing with the Harlem Renaissance, and my special guest, Tome Kozen, is going to be really hosting this. I'm only here to sort of get the thing going because his expertise is phenomenal on the topic. And for those of you who have no idea what it's about, you're going to learn. And for those of you who think you know what it's about, you're going to learn more. And I'm looking forward to this enormously because I'm aware of it and have a very limited knowledge of it. So, and that's the purpose of the webinar, not just to teach you, it's to teach me as well. So that will be coming up, and we'll be joined by Tome in just after 2 o'clock. In the meantime, welcome. I hope you're out there. I hope you're enjoying this wonderful late spring day. Let's do the reminders. Yes, please. Donations are really important to us. We are getting ready for our 25th season come the fall, and therefore we need to accumulate the resources in order to present it. Putting on Shakespeare is by no means cheap. So any donation that you can consider sending us is really important. And as I always say to you, it doesn't matter how small, we'd like big ones, but it doesn't matter how small it is. Every single dollar counts. And so do consider going to the website, clicking on the button, and sending us a few dollars or euros or whatever your local currency may be. We accept any currency. You know, Bitcoin, we'll take them. But do think about it. And we fortunately don't have to look for sponsors for the webinars for this current year because that's been covered by the Allegheny Foundation, who have our deepest thanks for their generosity, but it is also a great encouragement to us that one of the foundations actually look upon this as being something that they should support. Hello, Shelley. Yes, a beautiful day at last. Finally, I think spring is fundamentally with us and will not go away again. Hello, Linda. It's been a very odd spring, hasn't it? I mean, we had spring, then we had snow, then we had spring again, then we had snow again. And then we had an awful lot of rain. But now it looks wonderful. And I must say, the view from my back deck of all those wonderful trees that Pittsburgh is renowned for, I think people never quite understand just how much we live in a forest here in Pittsburgh. Wherever you look, trees, trees, trees. People sort of back in Ireland say, isn't it, do you not miss the green? I said, you should come here. Yes, Dennis, thank you, Allegheny Foundation. And thank you, Allegheny, and thank you, Pittsburgh, for all the support that we get, because it's not just the Allegheny Foundation. There are many, many foundations in Pittsburgh, and the level of support for the arts in this city is so wonderful. We couldn't survive without them. But they always seem to be there for us. And we're blessed in Pittsburgh that we have so many foundations. Other cities envy us for the amount of the potential that we have in Pittsburgh to raise funds, because we're a small city. We're a small city, but we're a great city. And we're a great city for art. And that is thanks to the generosity of the foundations and the family foundations, the business foundations. Without them, we wouldn't exist. But also for the generosity of the individuals. And there are so many individuals who regularly send us money as a way of ensuring that the quality of work stays high, that the quality of work stays constant. Hello, Grace, there in Dublin. A pleasant evening there too. That's wonderful. And there's Ken. Ken, you finally found the button to push. Well done. Ken was saying he found it difficult, but he's found it now. David, sunny evening in Stratford, UK. I always seem to I've got this funny thing in my head that anytime you go to Stratford-on-Avon, the sun is shining. I know that can't be true. Maybe it's because anytime I was there, the sun shone. And when it does shine in Stratford, it is just so gorgeous. You have never been there. If you are in the UK, you should make a pilgrimage to Stratford-on-Avon. It's absolutely delightful. And see a play or two as well, because they do the odd play in Stratford-on-Avon. But anyway, people are lining up. We'll give it another minute or two for the latecomers. There are always people who seem to turn up right at the last minute because they can't find parking, and or whatever. Anyway, we're going to, as I say, today you'll have much less of me and a lot more of Tome talking on the topic of the Harlem Renaissance. I'm excited about this. It's a different line of approach to the normal webinars where we tend to deal with plays or directly with theatre activity. This is a much broader topic. Hello, Yoke. Nice day in Holland, too. There you are. It seems to be pleasant everywhere. We've had no word so far from Florida, where it's always pleasant by the look of it, and other parts of the United States. But I have no doubt in Florida the sun is shining. It always is. And there we are again, just reminding you, go to the website, www.pictheatre.org, and press the donation button. One other thing also, if you do enjoy the webinars, and you wouldn't be there if you didn't, but if you do, please, 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 when you can, ask your friends to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Because then you can not only get all the updates and the alerts, but you can see every webinar we've done right back to the beginning of the lockdown, way back to end of March, April last year. Every single one of them, is there on the channel. You can use them. You can look at them again. You can even, if you find them useful, and I know there are various people across the States who are using them as teaching aids on some of the topics, please feel free to do so. These are free to you, to your friends, to anybody you like. The only question, or the only request we make is please, please, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and ask your friends to do the same, because that way we get the word out much more. And also, the more we build on our YouTube channel, the better for PICT. So please, please, just do that favor. I always say to people, if you see something on Facebook that you like, share it as well. Sharing is caring. So anyway, it's now nearly 3 minutes past 2. It's time we made a start. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to our guest. First of all, the topic, the Harlem Renaissance. Let's start on a very simplistic level. Renaissance, what does that mean? Well, according to the blessed source of all knowledge, which used to be the Encyclopedia Britannica, but is now Wikipedia. The Renaissance that we understand was a very fervent period of European cultural, artistic, political, and economic rebirth following the Middle Ages, it says there. 14th and 15th, from the 14th to the 17th century, really. The Renaissance promoted, again I'm quoting, the rediscovery of classical philosophy, literature, and art. So, Renaissance, a new birth. Hello, Catherine. A Renaissance is a new birth, a rebirth, a rediscovery, a reinvention, if you like. And that whole period of the Renaissance fed us what we now understand as the growth of the modern, in terms of literature, in terms of theater, in terms of art, and all those great Italian works of art of Michelangelo and Leonardo and Bellini. All of that is Renaissance. It is a rediscovery of classical form and a reinterpretation of it. So, the Harlem Renaissance, a new birth, and based around a particular location, but also a deeply important one for America. It was very much an American-made and American-created Renaissance. And out of a multitude of peoples who came together, were forced together, not by choice, but were forced together out of Africa to create a new identity and a new birth of culture. And I'm not going to say any more about it because I'm now going into realms of basic ignorance. And therefore, I invite you just to join with us. And Tome, welcome to the PICT webinar. I'm now going to basically hand it over to you. And I will drop in the odd comment. But as we said before, this is a topic on which I need to learn, and I hope all our viewers will benefit from. Because I think I'm right in saying it was a particularly American Renaissance and a very important Renaissance within America. Let's start with that very simple question. What was the Harlem Renaissance?
Well, first, thank you for having me in this wonderful conversation. I'm just checking my mic, and can you hear me? Everyone can hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, very good. Yeah, the Harlem Renaissance, to try and put it all together is like making a soup. It has so many different ingredients that just made the one thing work. And I'm just going to just preference all of this conversation, that there's going to be a word that I'm going to be using that it does not mean to offend anyone, but the word Negro is going to be used several times to just clarify and to represent the literature and the documentation that became what the Harlem Renaissance became. So I'm going to start with, I wrote all these little notes here, and I just want to kind of get it into a frame so we can then have the big discussion. But the Harlem Renaissance was an intellectual and creative period of African-American music, dance, art, fashion, literature, theater, political works that centered in Harlem, as Alan had said. New York City became a hotbed of people coming from the South. With the Great Migration coming, they were escaping from the Jim Crow laws. They were seeking a better life. Everyone kind of moved north, and Harlem just happened to be at that time going through a regentrification of neighborhoods. So Harlem was actually a Dutch province, and then the Afro-Americans came into it. And so it became this hotbed of culture, a mix of culture, of European culture and American Black culture coming from the South. So with them came all of these ideas. It was a combined seeking of new hope, of the end of slavery. Everyone was given the reparations, the idea of reparations. It was 40 acres and a mule. Everyone had those properties, but then the Jim Crow laws came in, and the Black people started to lose those rights and those properties. So they were seeking a new place to go. How can we escape this? Because they're actually the government is taking away the land that they promised me, that I had worked for. So now I have nothing. So I'm just going to start again and get my family out, for the idea of that hope, that new hope. Underneath that, you have, I'm going to go to my note here, because I want to get this correctly. You have this, had already been established, W.E.B. Du Bois's idea. I'm just going to clarify who he is for many people. He was an American sociologist, a socialist, a historian, a civil rights activist, and a writer and an educator. He had written a manifesto in 1903 called The Talented Tenth, which, to put in quickly in terms, was about the importance of education with the Black male in particular. So he believed that if the Black male could educate themselves through college, they would rise in the culture. So underneath that were the grandparents of these people in the South. I'm going to take my family up to the north because I believe in this manifesto, the talented 10th. I'm going to make my child belong to that talented 10th. So Harlem just happened to be the hotbed of where all these cultures were landing. And I think that's the most important part about understanding how it all began.
Yeah. When you talk about this, before the Renaissance began, it was almost an exodus as well.
Yes.
It was a vast, unhomogeneous group of people making a trek north. I mean, yes. In a funny way, it sort of mirrored the American Indian trek.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't just single group of people. One of the things that I find particularly fascinating in terms of this culture and this explosion of culture and talent was that it came from this vast group of people who were not necessarily the same peoples. Because slavery brought in vast numbers of Africans from different regions, from different areas. There was no cohesive, you might use the word race. There was no single race. It was a homogeneous. It was just like taking people from all over Europe,
yes,
and plonking them in New York. They were taking people from all over West Africa and plonking them into the southern states and into the Caribbean as well. I mean, the French were doing it in Haiti. The English were doing it just about everywhere. Thankfully, the Irish weren't doing it at all. But how did this come together into this creation of a homogeneous group of people?
Yeah, my take on it has always been that there was about the education. That was the main thing, that everyone wanted they saw the future was something better than myself. So it was about the children's future. So it was about education. That was what the idea of coming north was. It wasn't about escaping the restraints of race. It was more about education. The restraints of race, we knew were going to be rampant. Yeah. It was always about the future of the children. There was a very interesting film came out about 2 years or 3 or 4 years ago called Mudbound, I think it was. And it was the first time that I actually had seen characters portraying people that would be my grandparents, making this trek. And I just had never, been able to visualize it, to see what it looked like, that it took. So I think that is where it cemented itself for me, is that I saw many different peoples, as you said, many different cultures coming together and just shifting, and they brought all those cultures, those mixed cultures from Africa. Those traditions from individual families came with them. So that's part of that brewing soup. But there was the overall umbrella of the talented 10th. Yes.
So you have this trek north. People with a desire for, and as you say, for more than anything else, for education.
Yes.
The ability to learn, the ability, which is one of the great fundamentals that we seem to lack in America at the moment, proper, decent education. But they brought with them, as you say, disparate cultural backgrounds that were, traditional to them, to their own families, to their own backgrounds. You talk about your grandparents, but the grandparents of those people, their own traditions.
Yes.
This is all coming together into what, as you say, Harlem was a Dutch area of Manhattan.
Yes.
So it had huge European influence. Manhattan itself was very much a European conclave. All of this comes together, and you had in Harlem, I suppose, what you could describe as a true melting pot.
Yes. Yes.
So that's what generated this. You think this explosion of not just knowledge but culture? I
think it laid the bed for it, and then because of this need and understanding that education was prominent, another document. Here's the important thing with everyone. There was a man. His name was Alan Locke, and it's Locke, Alan, Lain, and he wrote I guess the manifesto Bible that became everything. That at the time he was kind of observing what was happening in the culture. He was observing all these energies that had come from the South, and he created this manifesto called the New Negro Movement, which eventually became the Harlem Renaissance. So that was the title of it at first. It was not the Harlem Renaissance. As it was happening, he was documenting it, and it was called the New Negro Movement.
And how did that begin to, from the New Negro Movement, how did that begin to develop into cultural expression? Okay,
I'm going to go to my notes because it's better if I read here. So what he did is he started collecting stories and interviewing. And from that, he came up with an idea like this battle of the old versus the new Negro, which he was calling it, the new person that was like wanted to be created, that everyone, these dreams and aspirations. What is the new Negro? It was an educated person that could independently financial independent, who had an education and had the language. That was the most important thing. He had the language to be able to communicate everything that the grandparents could not.
Yeah.
So that was the new Negro, and it was even better than Du Bois's The Talented Talent. It was like 5 steps above it. So all of that came with it, and the idea of this new person was the center point of it. What's going to become. So how is that person going to be entertained? How is the person? What is it that they want? What is the vision that they see for their community? And that spread into more and more of those people. That became Harlem. It just kept expanding. So the new Harlem was happening. So we have the new Negro inside of this new environment. So the cultures are spreading.
I want to go back to the point you made there, that he began by collecting stories.
Yes.
I immediately have a parallel in my head about the development of Irish culture as a national entity, because Ireland was very much subject to Britain and British culture or English culture. But end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, you had people like W.B. Yeats, Lady Gregory, Oscar Wilde's mother, collecting folk stories, collecting folk poetry, collecting folk music, and bringing this together to describe a new Celtic culture built out of the old. And it sounds like a very, very clear parallel. And I suspect that's, because truth is truth is truth, and human nature is human nature is human nature. So that you would find those parallels in just about any country that wants to have a renaissance in that sense. But here it wasn't a country having a renaissance, it was an entire, and again I use the word objectively, an entire race of people.
Yes. Yes.
Bringing something that was not natural to the continent, it was from a different continent, but reinventing it, rediscovering it, and giving it a rebirth within the context of their lives.
Exactly. And that's spot on. There was the idea of what the old Negro was. It was, they were pushed around, they were told what to do, they were a product of stereotypes and judgments, and they had to respond to what was put in front of them. Where the new Negro was self-assured. They did not lack self-respect. They did not lack self-independence. They were not dependent on anyone, for one, and they knew from their birth that they had rights. So there was like this battle of what this new person, this new being, this new energy that's going to be created was going to do. So actually all of Manhattan at that moment started to look up to Harlem. Like, what's going on up there? That energy is kind of cooking. Now we have to add to that the oncoming, the wars are coming in, and the depression is starting to cook. Right? This is my puppy here. He wants to take part.
It's lovely.
Yes, but yeah, we have those other elements that are lurking, underneath it. The beginning of World War I, we have to go into the military half of it now because it kind of figures into this person. World War I, the young men wanted to fight. The young Afro-American men, the Latino men, they wanted to fight in the war, but they were not allowed to actually serve in the U.S. Army. So they trained, but they were shipped overseas, and they had to actually join the French Army to fight. So already they're there, and that's where you can start to get these wonderful anthems, these military anthems, because they were segregated by themselves, and it just happened to be in that regiment, they became known as the Harlem Hellfires. I think it's the 365th, 69th Regiment. In that particular unit were two men that were quite important to the Harlem Renaissance, which was being created, U.B. Blake and Noel Sissel, and they created a band. So these young men were playing these and creating these songs, and songs that became anthems of the Harlem Renaissance that was yet to come. So the songs, traditional songs that we know, "How You Going to Keep Them Down on the Farm," chocolate, my chocolate colored Sammy boy. I mean, these are songs about these soldiers that were sung. But when we really listen to those lyrics, if you take the song "How You Going to Keep Them Down on the Farm," for what it really means, if you slow it down and take the charm out of it, it really is quite poignant.
Yeah.
So these young men had that idea, and so when they came back to America, they stepped right into this new Negro idea of like the superhuman, like the Superman. So that, I think, also is quite important to know, that when the exact moment when those young men came home, that's when I think the Harlem Renaissance kicked off. The true
birth of a new sense of personal and cultural identity.
Yeah.
One tiny point, a question I'll ask you. Of course, counter to this, American culture was still dealing with the minstrel shows and all of that. The false perception of what Black America was, and the whole blackface minstrel show, which was, I mean, one can condemn it because it was appalling, but also it was part of I suppose part of the Jim Crow white culture.
Yes.
That had to be. It was always lurking in the background.
Yes.
While, as you say, the new Negro, the new sense of identity and purpose was trying to grow. You had that, as I say, lurking in the background as an opposition.
Yeah, and one of the biggest stars of that, as the minstrel shows, as you said, grew and grew and grew, because it was the most popular form of entertainment in the United States. Ironically, one of the great ironies, I think, that go into entertainment in particular, is that from the minstrel show of being a white man in blackface, then there were Black men in blackface.
Yeah.
So it kind of, and so that half of it, you're correct, that half of it is still going on. As this new being is being created, Burt Williams, everyone knows of, Burt Williams in entertainment, but his partner, Walker Williams and Walker, I'm trying to come with his first name. They split, and one of them, I guess the Hollywood versus the reality. George Walker came to Harlem. Yeah. George Walker came to Harlem, and Burt Williams stayed in the minstrel world. So that, again, the split of, you can see it right there, of cultures, new versus old. It's even affecting the basic.
It's very clear. The old culture was maintaining the stereotype.
Yes.
The new culture was saying, no, we are different. And it's very interesting you use the experience of Paris, the experience of France, the experience of that First World. And as you say, when you take that song, "How Are You Going to Keep Them Down on the Farm," it is poignant.
Yeah.
There is a tragedy underneath it as well. It's always very interesting to examine lyrics from where they came from, rather than the catchy tune that goes.
Exactly. Yeah, and also with that, going back to Paris, going back to these young men in the war, that laid the groundwork, of those men being there, becoming heroes in Europe, specifically in Paris. These young men being free there, experiencing that life. That, and then they have the Harlem Renaissance happening, cooking, starting to cook here. This new world is starting to cook. We get the entertainment world of the Ballet Negro taking the show and shuffle along, going to Europe. And, so that's happening from Harlem. We've got this little nucleus of thing brewing, this popular entertainment. And in that company is Josephine Baker. So she stepped right into, so I'm just fast forwarding ahead a little bit, but she just stepped right into this hotbed of Paris that had been established way many years before her, with the exception, with the realizing that the black body, and the African body of it is a thing to kind of be fascinated with. So that also transferred to the Renaissance,
Well, this is exactly right, because it is, I mean, in terms of the Italian Renaissance or the European Renaissance in the 14th to 17th century, the discovery of beauty, the discovery of physical beauty, of male and female bodies as things of beauty is Baker is a perfect parallel to that, isn't she?
Yes.
That it is that realization that black is beautiful.
Beautiful, right.
Whereas it was not considered so. It was not, under the old race laws, it was not considered acceptable. It was rather like the race laws in Germany, that Jewish was not acceptable, black was not acceptable. So you got that sudden explosion of a realization, both within the black community and from the European origin community, that something new and different is happening.
Exactly.
It's a realization. So let's come to the magic word jazz, because that was exploding as well. And the earliest exponent that, infinitely more than me, but when I think about that early explosion, I think of people like Scott Joplin.
Yes.
Which was a combination of ragtime, as it became, and also an experience and understanding of classical music. One can't, nothing is ever new. Things are developed, things change, things grow. So with that explosion of the potential of education and moving people who had fundamentally no opportunity for education, to move them north, to bring them into that, as you say, the 10 bracket, exposed not only this desire for knowledge, but this lust for knowledge, this lust for growth, to a whole culture that was brand new to them, even though it was ancient to the Europeans.
Yes.
That must have created an explosion.
Yes, it's within itself. And now New York City was not the only place that, the migration, people further, and I think that has a great deal with this conversation, actually, and with the music and how jazz, kind of filtrated its way in, and the idea of a hot pulse. I think that's, the hot pulse became very prevalent. We know we've all seen this Ma Rainey, Black Bottom, film that just came out. So there it is, battling years later, but the same thing, like the old kind of Southern kind of mentality of musical sound and musical need and blues. Everyone's expressing it has a tie, a great tie, a close tie to slave songs, to slavery songs, spirituals. It has a tie into that. It has a different kind of beat to it. But when these people came north, they headed into a different kind of energy. So the tempos changed, and the need. You mentioned Scott Joplin, which is wonderful. Scott Joplin and Jelly Roll Morton, fantastic examples of knowledge, that really talented knowledge of music. They both out of the New Orleans world, that their families shifted there during the migration. So their background is in that kind of atmosphere. So we have that, and the brothel houses. So then the sound. These talented musicians are playing this kind of low down honky tonk kind of, music, for the people, we call it for the people. And that in itself changed the ear, so then they want a better life. They want a better world. So they shift again. So they take with them that low down sound, that hard, that what we call gut bucket kind of sound, and they're going to bring that to a hotbed like Harlem. So here it is, the energy, those energies of the new person, that new sound, the new, and I think that's the idea of freedom of improvisation, mixed with classical training, and this hotbed of new everything creates a new sound, so a new feel, and we don't know what it's called yet. No one knows what this thing is, but there's a pulse that changed, going from Harlem being, as we said, a European world, originally, to this new sound, this new feel, this new energy of I guess you could say pulse, a new pulse, you know. And
yeah, I mean, it's arguable. You could say that it was the European influence changed the African American influence.
Yes, you could say that.
I would say from that, just as with other cultures, the African American influence changed the European nature of sound, of music. It was again a renaissance of music. It was a rebirth of, you know, it's a bit like listening to the Jacques Lussier play Bach. You know, it's Bach, all right, but it isn't Bach the way Bach, to my mind, was the inventor of jazz because so much of his rhythm is syncopated. But Lussier then said, yeah, you're right, here, let's listen to it this way. And reinvent. It was a rebirth of that kind of Baroque music into jazz. Yeah. That probably must have been happening.
I think absolutely. I think that
on all levels of culture,
everywhere, and that it translated to literature. You know, so you have new ideas of how I can write. I have this freedom. I'm here from the South now, but I can write what I think politically. I can write what I feel, what I could never say there. And I'm educated because my parents brought me here. You know, so I know how to use the word now. And then I have this new energy, this pulse. You know.
So how did let's talk about writers for a moment. The evolution of new writing within this Renaissance.
Yes.
What kind of people were doing this, and what were their, I wouldn't say topics, but
well, I'm gonna the most popular ones. We're just gonna talk about the more popular. Langston Hughes, you know, is one, and then Zoe Near Hurston was another. And she came from, and that's used by Zoe Near Hurston. She came from the South. She came from Florida, part of the deeper South.
Deeper South.
Yeah, the Great Migration coming north, and she brought with her all those characters. So she hung on to the classical Southern characters, the humor, the village culture idea of these little personalities in villages. She brought that to Harlem. And so she started to look for the same stereotypical characters, personalities, and how they transferred over, you know, how they made the shift through this new world, this new being. And that's what her stories were basically about. She had a wonderful way of blending the cultures, like the old and the new Negro together, and making it in a humorous way that everyone could still laugh at themselves and still learn something at the same time and never be offended. So I think that's the beauty of her work. And then when she did choose to tell a more dramatic story, she did that the same way. Langston Hughes, completely the opposite. He was all in the jazz. He became very political in his work, all in that new jazz feel, but he also happened to be a gay Black man. You know, so he really wrote from a place of great heart. I'm going to say great heart and great compassion in his work. And there was a collaboration between the two at one time, but it never has been like fully realized. But those two, I'm going to say, were the most, I guess, for me, the foundation of how they changed literature in that. It also affected photography. I mean, luckily we've been, you know, there are many photographers that were documenting this new period. James Vanderzee is one of them. You know, you can find many of his works that kind of parallel what's happening. That he made many images of the Harlem Hellfires when they returned back, entertainers. But there's the ground level of just people in Harlem. You see how they just go from these newly arrived people from the South. And to these fashionistas, if you basically will. There's a certain kind of look that became about Harlem, like the Harlem Strut. You know, people would promenade on Sunday. They would just get dressed up just to walk around, you know, and that became part of this, again, the Renaissance, this new being, this new person, this new time. And I think that is the origins of what we come up with, like Black Power, Black Pride.
It is. I mean, we talk about the Harlem Strut and that whole, you know, the look, the feel, and I think most of us can, if you've seen the kind of photography, as you say, that was taken at the period, it was an expression of freedom, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was something that their parents, their grandparents could never have done. Suddenly they can. They have. There is this little portion of the world in which they are free. Yes. And I don't just mean free because they're not in servitude, but free in their mind, free in their imagination. And that sense of self-discovery and self-awareness. Yeah. Again, causes change to occur in what was considered normal.
Yes. Yes.
They are changing the past. The past isn't changing them.
Yeah.
Which is that growth. What about? I mean, you talk about literature and music, visual art. Was that a strong point?
Yes, the same. It affected everything. Again, the idea of the beautiful black blue skin, became the thing. So the different textures and the different shades of what it was a black person had were fully recognized there. And you have a lot of mixed races going on at the same time. So it affected art, sculpture, paintings, plastic arts. Like I said, fashion. Everything just shifted to the world, but it always had underneath it a respect for like African culture. And so that one little tie tried to stay in particular with art, it tried to stay in a homage to the motherland, if you will. Now I'm going to bring in another voice into this whole conversation that kind of threw it out of whack. At the same time that this new world is being created and the new Negro is taking ownership of their lives, we've got this pride going on. And at this point, it is starting to be called a renaissance. That term is kind of being tossed around. Then we have Marcus Garvey, who is a Jamaican man who was also based in Harlem, but he was completely the opposite way. He felt that the new Negro had gone to such an extreme that they were losing their connection to Africa. So he created this whole idea of a militant stance. He founded a church. It was a political movement, a religious political movement, and he had many, many followers. So they were trying to negotiate, I think, ultimately, how to live in America but still be an independent entity inside of it, separate from white culture. He actually went so far as to campaign and to buy ships and to finance himself. And there was a whole Back to Africa movement that was happening at the same time that this Renaissance has kind of blown up. That was the idea. So you have these two things clashing, the new Negro plus the new Negro. And he believed in the new Negro, which was that we were so superior that we should go back to Africa and form our own country. We're not fleeing. We're going back because we're superior. So that was going on at the same time that many people don't really talk about that idea, but his ground level idea remained. Even though it felt, his plan did not work, that idea of it remained. And so those people, I think, have a lot to do. His disciples have a lot to do with the Renaissance actually ending. It's kind of not ending, but expanding and kind of blending in a way where they were taking, well, I think it should be this, and I think it should be this, and I think we should head in this direction. So art began to expand in a different way, and religion filtrated in. It came in.
Yeah, because it's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, that any movement will reach. I mean, everything has its time, according to Doctor Who. That things don't stay the same, and even the Italian Renaissance didn't stay the same. It began to expand outwards and have influence over other cultures. But that notion of a separate nation, which we understand very much in terms of Native Americans.
Yes.
Notion,
yes.
That they are a separate nation. They rule themselves. They govern themselves. They have their own laws. They have their. It wasn't going to work, though, was it?
I didn't. No, I don't think. I mean, he was quite popular, though. I mean, he was quite popular. There were full parades of pageantry. I mean, he had many followers, and for them, that was their belief, and they were committed to that. But I don't think the idea was going to work. I mean, he went bankrupt ultimately, with the idea of the ships. But what it did, I think, is it opened the door and opened the possibility of the world seeing that there were many different kinds of Black Americans. And the idea was not just one set, and it opened the door. And then we have the Nation of Islam comes in. We have all these religions, so it opened the door for I can think differently. I can think independently, which is part of the new Negro dream.
How big a thing was religion in this whole evolution?
Hugely, because it came from the South. That remained. The church became, it remained the nucleus of the family unit. So that stayed the entire time, and it still remains in Harlem. Harlem is quite prestigious for its churches. Yeah. But religion was a big part. But then also there was when you say you sin on Friday, Saturday, you go to church on Sunday. That idea. The Renaissance. Like I said, it did get out of control at a certain point. Yeah.
And you mentioned Nation of Islam. There was I suppose because of the African connection, there was an attraction. But that was later, wasn't it? We're not talking about
later. Yes, later. Yes,
that was much later. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, during the Renaissance, it was definitely Marcus Garvey was the big alternative.
Yeah.
But there were also the black Jewish.
Yeah.
In Harlem. I mean, it was such an open world of I can actually try and find my way, what I determined the new Negro was going to be in this world.
So this leads me to the next logical question, which is, what was white New York's reaction to this?
I'm just going to put it flat. I want to know what's going up in Harlem. I'm just going to put it out. That's what happened. I want to know what's going up in Harlem. There's so much energy being created up there, so unique, and it's such unique energy that the world wanted to go there. I mean, it became like the hotbed of everything. And that's, I'm not going to say that there was, it was peaceful, because I'm sure that there were riots and disagreements, but overall it became the place to be. And that made the formation of the springing of all these famous nightclubs that we know, the pinnacle being the Cotton Club. But I think that was the general idea. The feel of it. Everybody wanted to know what was going on up there, because it's such a culture that we don't know, and they're unlike what we imagined a Southern Black person to be.
Because we have this rather naive opinion that the Old South was racist and the North wasn't. Yeah. But of course, the North was. I mean, New York was a very racist city.
Absolutely.
It not just racist against African Americans, but just about anybody who wasn't a native New Yorker was somehow wrong and shouldn't be on the planet. But middle class New Yorkers really were fascinated, weren't they?
Oh yes, and then you also have going back to literature again. I mean, you're in the middle of this, this fascination with Harlem and the new Negro. You have a novel like Native Son, comes out, by Richard Wright, which kind of shows the two races mixing supposedly peacefully, and then a very violent, incident, a tragic incident happens to this one character, bigger. And so I think that book also had a great deal to do with how people began to view Harlem and this whole period of what we call the Renaissance, like that whole atmosphere. It's dangerous up there too.
It was always that, wasn't it? That sense of, I even back in the 70s when I was first in America, that that notion that Harlem was a dangerous place. Mm-hmm. It's full of criminals, it's full of drugs and evil things, which it wasn't, no more than anywhere else was. Right. But it gained that reputation of being a place to fear.
I think that particular novel had a great deal to do with that.
Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful, I've read it, and thing by Levi C. Hubert. I mentioned it to you before, and it's a very tongue-in-cheek view of it's called "The Whites Invade Harlem," and it's a short essay, but it's very funny, and I recommend anybody to look it up. You'll find it on through Wikipedia or whatever. But it is this notion that Harlem and what was described as the new Negro became almost a topic of fascination. That one would invite these strange people from the South now occupying Harlem into your homes as novelty guests and things, which when I look at it, I think this is awful, this is desperate, this is a dreadful way to behave. but in a way, it was also good because it was a revelation. It was this discovery that this strange race of people from the South were intellectual, articulate, creative, just like us. The shock must have been considerable.
Yes, I think so. To run into someone who could speak language, your same language, without a Southern drawl, with a Southern drawl, but still speak your language, because they're being educated. They're being educated in a different way. That was challenging, I'm sure.
Yeah. The same was true of the Irish. No blacks, no Chinese, no Irish. But it was a shock to. It's always a shock to the ruling class to discover that those they rule over are as clever as they are, and very possibly more so. But how did New York in itself, and what we might describe as middle class Northeastern America, how quickly did they start to absorb and utilize this new creativity that came out?
I think it was pretty quick. I was going to make a comment that one of the ways that, as it happens now with young people, language began to change. This new language came about. There's a lovely play that Zora Neale Hurston wrote, short story, and I cannot come up with the title of it, but it's part of a larger play called Spunk. And one of the three stories is a clash of those cultures. There's a young man who is from the South, newly arrived, a young man who had been from the South, who is a New Yorker now. He is a Harlem resident. And there's a young girl who has been there for a bit, and she is a domestic worker. So it's about these two entities trying to impress this young girl. And you get this language that's flying around that I think it's where we start getting nicknames and codes, for people, because they're from the South, but they have these new identities in the North. And I think that the energy of New York picked that up. So I think that was the first part about it. These people have a language that I want to know. I want to know what these hip little phrases are. So language played a great deal in the transformation of the New Yorker.
Yeah,
I think it came the other way. It came from Harlem going downtown the other way, and it mixed with the cultures in the Lower East Side, with the Irish and and the Polish people, the immigrants. So this new language started to bleed into the overall city. I think into all the boroughs, and you start to get this new person, this new New York being. This New York.
And the new New Yorker was. You might say it was an infiltration of the new Negro into New York that created the new New York.
New Yorker, right? Yeah.
Next time we talk, I'm going to talk more about the influence that this Renaissance had on American culture, and therefore most culture in the world, because American culture has influenced so much of the modern world. If there are anybody with questions, please put them up. And as I always say, if you can't do it now, always send an email. We'll get a response to you. But if you have any questions, do please put them up. How are we doing? We're all right. Was there an active theater as such? Were people within this new Harlem Renaissance using drama as a method of expression in the way they use music and literature?
Yes, there was I'm just going to speak on what I really know on. There was the form of the new Negro Ballet, which was a company there in Harlem, which predates Dance Theater of Harlem by decades. I mean, many, 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 many decades. So movement, yes, was a big thing. Theater, as far as like cabaret, more in the cabaret world, cabaret singers and and house parties and everything. But before there were legitimate clubs, people would have parties in their home. They were called rent parties. So you would have cook up a batch of food. You'd have live musicians sometimes, and they would sing, and you'd roll up your rug. That's where the term rug cutter came from. And they would roll up the rug, and they'd charge 10 cents to get in, 15 cents to get in, and you have your rent, So I think that idea of that world transferred the need for clubs and drama on stage.
It's weird because what you're describing in a sense is exactly what happened in Ireland in the late 19th and even earlier than that, the 18th century. This notion of the village gathering together in a house where they would eat something and they would take a little drop of something and tell stories or dance or whatever in the house. It's what I like to describe as, I'm one of those people who believes there's no such thing as a city. There are only villages. And we all live in villages. And Harlem, in that sense, became a huge village. But village behavior, that need to communicate and to relate to one's neighbors is a village thing, much more than it is a city thing. A city doesn't really exist. I'll use LA as an example. I mean, LA is, one of the biggest physical city areas in America, but it's actually a conglomeration of villages. Harlem had that sense to it, that it was a village and everything went out from it. Same in Pittsburgh. The Hill was a village. August Wilson wrote his plays about a village he lived in, and with stories from that village. So it's fascinating that growth of, as you say, the cabaret culture.
Yeah, and those performers, that were performing in house parties. Fats Waller was a pianist in a house party. That's how he started off writing his little jingles and his songs, and and those little personas and personalities formed little troops, little theater troops that would take the idea was to take these little songs and ditties on the road. So they formed these little touring companies, Bessie Smith and her touring company, it'd be the Ands, yes. And they would just kind of play around, go from town to town. And they left New York, eventually to go on these little tours. But the idea of that persona and the producers from, the Broadway world would say, oh, I like this singer. Can I get her? We'll feature her in a show, like one, for a song or something. And that's how it all starts.
There's a question come up. Tell me, what fascinates you most about this period?
It's I'd say a combination of pride. The idea that there was such pride of knowledge that a Black person could represent themselves, just represent themselves in a way that's very different. It's we have this, take it for granted now, but at that time, no, it was not a place. There wasn't a place for them to just say, I am, and I feel safe on this particular street, and I can dress to my, from head to toe in any way that I want, and just represent and just walk down the street with extreme pride, and I'm doing it on purpose. I'm literally,
Isn't it extraordinary, that we've, religion teaches us that pride is one of the 7 deadly sins, and yet I would consider pride one of the greatest human virtues. You have a sense of yourself and your place in the world, and as you say, to go strutting.
And
I am here. I am of here. This is me. This is what I wear.
And one of the biggest financial booms in Harlem was when Madam C.J. Walker, came to, had her beauty parlor, there, for Black women. I mean, Black women, for the first time really could go to a specific place, not in your kitchen, like and have your aunt or your mother burning your hair. They could go to a specific beauty parlor specifically for them and come out just like the white women downtown, and say, look, I'm beautiful, and I'm going to, I'm beautiful, and I'm going to put on this beautiful outfit, and I'm just going to walk around, I'm just going to walk, so that, I mean, that's a huge, huge step from the South. I mean, massive, just the thought. I mean, so I think that excites me,
So in a way, that cultural evolution, that cultural explosion came from, I think, perhaps that word, pride. I am here. This is my space. This is where I am. This is where I belong. And this is what I think. And this is how I wish to express what I think.
Yes.
because that's the fundamental freedom, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, Grace has that question there. Do you feel there was also a sense of healing through the arts at that time?
Yes, I do. I think now I'm going to say the combination of music that I talked about before. That under that rustic sound from the South with this new hot energy in there.
Yeah.
People have to express. But that's the one thing people have to express themselves. So I think with in the arts, it just exploded in that way. They could actually see themselves for the first time. Sometimes like a painting, they could actually see themselves for the first time, and a photograph of themselves for the first time. There's a fascinating thing that I found out doing some research, this is all photography, not just Black photography, but just all photography. That at this time in Harlem, so say there was a couple and they had a child that had passed away, a very young child, that a family in the South who did not make the migration had never seen before. So there was a photographer, James Randersy, I spoke of. He specialized in photographing these deceased children in a way that they were beautiful. So then the photograph could be sent to the South. And so, so that whole idea of honoring ancestry traveled, the importance of that, the importance of Africa, that became a big thing. That was a huge thing that filtrated through the Renaissance, and it stayed. It stayed there. We have a respect for our ancestors. We're going to figure this out some way. We're going to figure it out. So that just fascinates me.
There you are. Dennis is a good one. What authors do you wish more young people learned about in college?
Oh, great one. Hold on, let me get this list right here for you. I do. Claude McKay, Georgina Douglas Johnson is another one. I would say Zora Neale Hurston for sure, but everyone, but those two, Claude McKay and Georgia Douglas Johnson, those are very obscure ones. Nella Larson is another. I think they're making a film of one of her books, where it's about passing, about a Black woman during the Renaissance who passes away. But I think she's one. So those are the three, I think.
We don't teach enough.
No.
At all. Well, we don't teach enough at all under our current system, but we certainly don't teach enough. I mean, I have some of an awareness because, when you move to a new country, the first thing you do is try to find out as much as you can about its system, especially if you're working in the arts. But this is fascinating to me because it's just putting all of those growth points in context. I mean, you talk like Scott Joplin and Jelly Roll Morton, and when they were, and because of when they were, why they did what they did with music, and you see that context as an explosion of education, and of one culture finally being able to bring itself to another culture and share it and change it and allow it to develop. And as you say, that wasn't necessarily just in Harlem. It was happening in various places as well. The notion of, as you say, the house parties where, Fats Waller would go and play the piano. Of groups, the and word, Fats Waller and, or whoever and, which allowed for that growth in the whole big band sound that eventually becomes Duke Ellington.
Yeah, and look at I think the culmination of all of this that we've just been talking about was Porgy and Bess. Because you got the Gershwins coming in, they've got that hot jazz sound that they love, and they're trained, they're classically trained musicians in a way. They appreciate classical music. We've got the opera world coming on. We've got theater from Harlem. We've got the South going on. We've got I think that was the big umbrella that kind of changed everything.
I'm glad you raised that one because to me, Porgy and Bess is an opera in the purest sense, and it's written by a Jewish classical musician and his brother, but about topics that are specifically and absolutely African American. And it works.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is a recognition by one culture of another marrying together. It's to me, Porgy and Bess is, I used the word earlier, is the melting pot
Yes.
of theater in this sense, of cultures coming together and recognizing one another.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great place to start with the next conversation.
Hey, Paz, what about atheism? Was there a cohort within the Harlem Renaissance that felt religion no longer served and should be left behind?
Those were, yes. I'm going to say those were, well, this is generalization, I'm going to make here. Though that little consort that we're talking about right there are the ones who shifted to Marcus Garvey.
Yeah.
They didn't give up on religion completely. They just shifted to another view of it completely, because the traditional Black church was still steeped in the Southern beliefs, and so there was a militancy coming in there. Yeah, so completely, and a rebellion. Yeah, absolutely.
Was the Marcus Garvey movement really where the embryos that produced Black Panther and Nation of Islam?
I think underneath it, yes. I would say that, yes. I would say the nucleus of the germ. Yeah.
Yeah, of separate nation as opposed to let's integrate.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We've been at it for an hour. That's been brilliant. For all of you, if you have any further questions, do email us, and I'll get them back onto Tome, and he will respond, won't you?
Yes.
Although he's busy in rehearsal at the moment because he's directing. But Tome will be back with us in 2 weeks' time, and we're going to have a talk about the effects that this Harlem Renaissance had on the development of all art and all culture in America, from that point to the future, to the present, and hopefully into the future beyond us. In the meantime, Tome, thank you so much. I will let you go now because you're a very busy person at the moment. It's been great talking to you, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you so much. Bye. And
for everybody else, that's it for this week. As I say, do send any question you have to us at, you can find us always through the website. Do spread the word. If you enjoyed this, tell your friends. It's always available on YouTube. It will actually be on YouTube literally within moments. And if you do go to YouTube and if you send your friends to YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. It really does matter. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest alerts on new webinars. It's all there. I'll be back to you next week with a different topic. And in 2 weeks' time, Tome will be back to complete our 2 programs on the Harlem Renaissance. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. And the one final reminder, if you find yourself with a few spare dollars or euros or zlotys or whatever else your currency may be, hit the donate button. It all helps. It all matters. And thank you so much for being with us. Have a great week. See you next Friday.